Good morning. On behalf of Dr. Roberto Escalante, General Secretary of UTWAC, we warmly welcome you to the webinar, Reestructuring the Social Fabric, Reimagining Finance for Development. In this dialogue space, crucial topics for the present and future of our societies will be addressed: financing for development, understood not only as an economic tool, but is a true mechanism for the social reactivation in a world market by growing inequalities, having reliable institutions, equitable social contracts, and governance that includes everyone is essential. An initiative derived from a UN conference of the Civil Commitment to close the gap for and a decision making. This webinar has brought together various scholars on a subject coordinated by Gala Diaz-Langu, Executive Director, CPEC. We appreciate your participation. Go ahead, Gala. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. It is my honor to welcome you to this new session of the New Horizons webinar, Nuevos Horizontes. And today we'll be discussing how to reweave social fabric by reimagining development finance and how to go from disaffiliation to a more anchored solidarity. But first, let me introduce the webinar, the series in itself, which is conducted by UDUALC together with the International Panel on Social Progress and other partners such as CPEC. The International Panel on Social Progress is an independent global network of researchers, practitioners, and civic leaders dedicated to turning rigorous evidence into practical ideas for a fairer, more democratic, and sustainable work. Building on its landmark report, Rethinking Society for the 21st Century, this New Horizons dialogue aims at convening diverse voices to bridge research and action. Today's webinar carries that mission forward, sharing concrete pathways to reweave the social fabric and align development finance with inclusion. We are in an era that is marked by eroding trust, by fragmented global cooperation, by rising disaffiliation, and we must confront development finance not just as an economic tool, but as a social re-anchoring mechanism. The SEVI commitment emerging from the Financing for Development Summit this year, the fourth one, charts a new terrain, targeting multi-trillion-dollar SDG gaps through reforms in debt sustainability, tax mobilization, multilateral lending, and blended finance. Yet, closing the finance gap, which is estimated around 4 trillion annually, requires more than headline pledges. It demands investments that rebuild trusted institutions, equitable social contracts, and inclusive governance. This webinar convenes reference from these discussions, and we will today explore how development can be financed, how it can be infused with the principles of social inclusion and accountability, and how it can counteract disaffiliation, reinforce legitimacy, and revitalize multilateralism through an anchored solidarity. And to do so, we have a brilliant panel composed by 3 experts who I will introduce as I'm posing questions to them. So we will start now with Evelyn Wong. Evelyn is Director of Policy at the Asian Venture Philanthropist Network, where she leads policy initiatives to foster impact economy across Asia. Her focus includes advancing emerging technologies such as AI, impact investment, blended finance, and strategic philanthropy. Prior to AVPN, Evelyn consulted for the World Bank and the World Health Organization on health sector projects and led strategic initiatives at the Clinton Health Access Initiative. She also holds significant strategy and operations expertise from her time at Bain & Company. Evelyn holds a Master in Public Affairs from Princeton University and dual bachelor's degrees in Economics and Politics from Scripps College. She is currently based in Selangor, Malaysia. So Evelyn, it is wonderful to have you with us today. The first round of questions is targeted towards having a complete diagnosis of the current situation. So in that framework, I would like to hear your perspective on which are the main challenges regarding development financing from the Asian perspective.
Thank you so much, Gal, for that introduction, and thank you all for this opportunity to really talk about these important issues. Maybe I can also start a little bit with my background, and I'm coming specifically from an Asian perspective. As AVPN, we are the largest platform of social investors in Asia with over 700 funders and resource providers. And so as a network, we work with foundations, corporations, family offices, but also multilaterals and governments to really catalyze the social investment network for Asia specifically. So going back to your question about what are some of these main challenges on development financing, for Asia specifically, we see that Asia is an area with high need and high potential. So it's a very heterogeneous area in terms of development. We have 60% of the global population, 35% of global GDP, and produce 58% of worldwide carbon emissions. So in order to actually move the world towards the sustainable development goals, Asia needs to be activated. And whatever comes from here, leadership also can be a model for the world. And that's what we're trying to do. In terms of development financing, particularly as we see that shift from a reduction in overseas development assistance, that has also impacted Asia significantly. But as this has changed, we are also trying to see how new ways of funding can be really mobilized given Asia's rising wealth, given that so many of these challenges are interconnected, such as climate and health and education. Investment in across borders makes sense in this world, and that's also the position that we are really trying to bring together different kinds of allies into this fight and not relying just on previous models of development assistance. So maybe I'll stop there and and hear from other panelists as well on how they see this landscape.
Thank you so much, Evelyn, for this first landscape from the Asian perspective. So we will move on to Martina Abregu, who is the Vice President at Ford Foundation. So Martina is Vice President for International Programs. As such, he works on designing and implementing a vision for the Foundation's work at the global level, seeking to respond to the global drivers of inequality by bringing new voices and perspectives into the international arena. He works with teams in the US and around the globe, including 10 regional offices and 6 international programs, which are civil engagement and government, gender, racial and ethnic justice, natural resources and climate justice, technology and society, future of work and workers, and global governance. Before joining the foundation, Martin was Executive Director of the Center for Legal and Social Studies, CELS, a leading human rights organization in his home country, Argentina. He is a lawyer with a degree with specialization in international law from the University of Buenos Aires and holds a Master of Law degree in International Legal Studies from the American University in Washington, D.C. He has served as an associate professor on human rights at the University of Buenos Aires School of Law. Martin, it is wonderful to have you with us today. And also for a first broad landscape of where we are today, I would like to hear your perspective on which are the main challenges regarding development financing that you see from Ford Foundation.
Thank you, Gal, and thanks for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be part of this conversation. I guess I'll have to talk to my team to ensure that they use a shortened version of my bio, so you don't have to go through all that stuff when introducing me. But we will definitely do it. And just I think it was a great idea to actually start with a question about Asia, because those of us who tend to talk about the global level or the global order, etc., are cannot avoid underestimating the regional differences. Okay, and I actually think that a lot of what we describe as global order, global trends, etc., is mostly determined by what happened in what was traditionally described as the Western world, and the U.S. and Europe, and some of the key players that have been at the center of the global order for the last 40 years. But that situation is rapidly changing, and the farthest away that you are from those center of powers, the different the world looks. Okay, so in my trips to Asia, I'm always really surprised how the different mood that you have in those countries vis-a-vis the mood that you will find either in Europe, in the US, or even in Latin America, where the mood is much closer to the US or Europe. Africa is somewhere in between. So anyway, I'm just saying that it's important to acknowledge these regional moods, and when we are thinking about global topics like development financing. My first comment in terms of development financing, though, and trying to begin to respond to your question about the big challenges, like basically development financing as we know it was designed in a global order that doesn't exist any longer, right? So we have a development financing system that is part of a global order that is rapidly changing, and that we all struggle to adjust. So when I think about the key players around development financing, when you think about development financing from a traditional point of view, and again, Evelyn's point were very helpful in thinking about new things. But when you think about key players in development financing from a traditional point of view, like the US or Europe or the international community, broadly speaking, or development financing bureaucracy, all of these key players are really, in a very different place today. I don't need to talk about the US. We all know what happened with the USAID, so I don't want to get into that. Europe is actually trying to, respond to some of these changes, but we have already seen a lot of cuts on the European side already, and we may see more cuts in the European continent too moving forward. When you think about the international community, yes, the Seville meeting was a very interesting place and a lot of interesting things happened, but at the same time, it was a clear example of the limitations of some of these possibilities moving forward. And when you think about the bureaucracy that I am part of, we are all struggling to catch up with all the changes that we are describing. So when you think about what we need moving forward, or how are we going to get to the development financing system that, Gala, you are aiming for, the one that you are envisioning, any change at this level needs three things, right? Ideas, champions, and the capacity and the institutionalization of whatever new ideas you have. At the ideas level, I would say, we have some good ideas. And there are a few things out there that we can discuss, from global public investments to the kind of things that you've been talking about, the development finance based on solidarity. So I think that, we are doing okay at the ideas level. I think we can do better. We still can do better, but there are a few things that we can definitively push forward. When I think about who are the champions, though, that's where I begin to struggle, right? Because I don't think that it's going to be enough with civil society or social movements. And I don't think it's going to be enough with a few governments that are willing to engage in some of these conversations. Even if we have right now we may have 10 governments that are committed to do something different. That's great, but 10 governments is not enough. We will need like 60, 70. So we are definitely not, and 10 I may be exaggerating. We may be doing a bit better than that. But I don't think that we have like the core group of support that we need at the champions level. And I actually think that other champions like the bureaucracy is also lagging behind. And again, I think that Seville was a step in the right direction, but not enough to produce the change that we are seeking here. And all of this connects with the question of institutionalization. If we are going to build a new development financing system, how are we going to institutionalize it? With the crisis of multilateralism that we are facing, we need to be very realistic that institutionalizing something new is going to be extremely challenging. And yes, I do think that, middle powers could be an interesting partner here, but I also think we need to be realistic about not only middle powers power, but also middle power's willingness to lead and to engage in a way that it's more than transactional, right? So I really struggle thinking, how are we going to institutionalize that? Does that mean that I'm pessimistic? No, I am not. I think that there are opportunities, among other reasons, because we are all very much aware that we need to come up with something new and we need to come up with something fast. And we need to come up with something better. And you are seeing some of that already happening in specific areas like humanitarian assistance, where things are moving in a slightly faster way than in other areas. But I do think that that if we are going to make the progress that we need to make, we really need to up our game because we are facing some major challenges. So let me stop here and, let me know if next round you want me to be more optimistic, okay?
Yes, indeed. Please note that. So thank you so much, Martin. Last but not least, we have Rose Ngugi join us. Rose is the chair of Southern Voice, a global network of Southern think tanks. Dr. Ngugi holds a PhD from the Business School of Birmingham University in the UK. She has specialized in financial markets and she holds a master and a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Nairobi in Kenya. She was a senior advisor in the office of the executive director of the Africa Group, one of the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. Dr. Ngugi has been a member of the Central Bank of Kenya and has vast experience teaching at the University of Nairobi School of Economics. Rose, thank you so much for joining us. And I would like you to share with us Southern Voice's perspective on the current situation of financing for development from the Global South, and especially what does this mean in terms of inequalities?
Yeah, thanks very much, Gala, for welcoming me to this webinar. It's a pleasure to meet all of you and to share various perspectives that relate to development finance. And I want to, as I discuss the inequalities and perspective from the Global South, I want to look at it from the institution or the network that I am a chair of, that is the Southern Voice network, which brings together about 71 think tanks, which means that we are looking at how to generate evidence that would actually focus our attention as far as addressing matters to do with the development finance is concerned. When the Southern Voice was being formed, it was slightly before 2015 when the SDGs were adopted. And the key objective was actually to think through how we can implement SDGs and ensure that no one is left behind. And there are key areas of inequalities that tend to be brought out even at this network level of think tanks. And one of them is actually on development, whether you're talking about economic aspects, resources, political power, or even how our economic structures look like. If we think about the Global South, one of the key things that one would think about at the moment is actually the debt burden that the Global South is dealing with in the context of trying to seek for financing for development. The second thing that I would talk about in terms of inequality is how the Global South is also represented in the global policy dialogue. Whether you're thinking about multilateral organizations like IMF, World Bank, and the like, what you find in these institutions is that since they've been there for 80 years, the kind of agreement that was formed during that period may not necessarily serve the purpose at the moment with the quota system. And this raises the issue whether the voices of the Global South are actually being represented. And even when there are reforms that are going on, for example, with the IMF, you'll find that recently, of course, they brought in a third chair for African countries, sub-Saharan African countries, but that is not enough in terms of talking about representation, because you saw even when the SDRs were being distributed, there was very little that went to the Global South. And the third thing that one would think about in the perspectives of inequality is also how we support generation of evidence. Evidence is very important to drive a policy, but what we find is that think tanks in the Global South, they face various challenges, not just in financing, but also in having a platform where they can engage at the global policy debate. And it's for this reason that Southern Voice came in to provide an open platform for think tanks to share research and perspective for the Global South, and to see to it that they can influence the power dynamics in the policy debates at the global level. So bringing a Global South to the forefront of policy debates is seen as a way of raising the voice or amplifying the voice for the Global South in terms of representation and listening to the problems that the Global South is facing. In a nutshell, what we are saying is that having such a network, the key focus with the think tanks is to address aspects of knowledge asymmetry, and also to look at the participation deficits that exist in the global dialogue as far as development is concerned. And this in itself cuts across even when we talk about development finance. I think I want to stop there at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rose, for this first perspective from the Global South. So I would like to move towards the second round of questions, more focused on the future, on the pathways that we can take forward from this context to a context that we would like a bit more. So I would like to start with Evelyn. So Evelyn, could you share what innovations do you think could help funders work together to become more effective? And also, based on your vast trajectory, what experiences can be identified to build a long-term perspective?
Thanks, Ga. And so I think, first of all, to ground this, I would say the perspective that we have at AVPN is also that we need to have this long-term investment kind of mentality, right? We are bringing in funders and allies, everybody who wants to work to have a better future for Asia and do impact in Asia. But particularly as we engage with governments and within the region, it's going away from that paradigm that Martin had mentioned before of, the global north giving resources to the global south, and rather that this is actually something for all of us. And I think this is the way that maybe the development finance has to go in the future as well, given that we live in a different world now that isn't as committed to multilateralism and that future. And so I have four large buckets that I will talk about in terms of innovation to build a longer term perspective. One is more on building coordinated platforms and infrastructure. So we are building a platform for blended and innovative finance for Asia in order to have mapping existing capital commitments, identifying investable opportunities, connecting funders with projects needing catalytic support. And this is particularly important as there's a $4 trillion SDG gap globally, and a part of that is actually coming also from Asia. And as we know that the funding in current sources are not going to fill that gap, how do we ensure that different funders then come together and countries also have a say at the table to say, these are actually what we prioritize. These are the projects that we've lined up with the right policy support that are going to come through, rather than having projects in a way designed for them from the outside and saying, okay, you have to do this way. So I think there's different ways that we can actually work together by having these platforms. The second one is on technology. So technology use can also break down information barriers that limit capital flow and trust, right? So we have a platform now that we've started with funding from Monetary Authority of Singapore and Gates Foundation, which is Impact Collab, and it de-risks philanthropic giving. So it streamlines due diligence and allows wealth holders to engage in philanthropy more easily, starting to build that into wealth management. So this is more of a long-term play to actually make it easier for people to actually give cross borders, particularly where there might be higher need. The third thing is on focusing on unlikely allies and ecosystem building. So, and we know that there's so much money convenings across the world and these discussions, and those are important, but bringing together unlikely allies from different sectors, I think, is especially needed. So bringing in the private sector, government, philanthropy, and corporates. When we speak to corporates, there's actually such a great missed opportunity sometimes in using the resources, the supply chains, the commitments internally to actually change a lot of what we need to see as well. So sometimes when we are just in a development silo, we are not, maximizing what we actually could get from the ecosystem of people who want to make change. And lastly, we also work on pooling resources, trying to reduce duplication, knowing that every single funder might not be able to build that entire infrastructure on their own, but they would be willing to work with others to invest into something. And so that, combined with the first thing that I mentioned about having a platform is our ways that we want to amplify our impact in Asia. And so these are some of the innovations that we're investing in.
Thank you so much, Evelyn, for this perspective look and also several quite thought-sparkling innovations that you shared with us. So moving on to Martin, hopefully a more positive Martin. How can reforms in debt, taxation, multilateral lending, and blended finance be linked explicitly to legitimacy and inclusion from your perspective?
Thank you, Gala. And okay, I'll do my best to be as optimistic as I can. Let's see how it goes. So let's start with a crude description of what we have, right? Because I think it is important to start by acknowledging that our current global economic governance systems, including all the key international financial institutions, etc., were again built for a very different world. But not only that, they were built with a very clear idea of who should be the winners and who should be the beneficiaries. And we know that the beneficiaries are not necessarily benefiting for those systems, right? Like when we see a lot of the problems that the current global economic governance system is facing, it's not that this system is malfunctioning. It's functioning exactly as it is supposed to function, benefiting some and punishing others. And this is what we need to change. Rose was talking about the debt problem in many global South countries. Actually, it's super interesting to see that when you look at the level of debt of many of those countries, you see that they are not more indebted than most countries in the global north. So actually, these countries do not have a debt problem. What they have is an interest payment problem, because they are paying a level of interest that no one else is paying. So the problem is a very different one when you look at it that way, right? So in that sense, I do think that a lot of these answers, as been already pointed out, start by bringing more voices into the table. And Gala, when you were describing my own focus of work right now, this is one of the key issues that we are doing. Like, how are we bringing more, different players into this conversation? And here again, when we talk about Global South, we need to make a distinction. Are we talking about Global South governments and Global South movements? Are we talking about global civil society? What are we doing? And again, we think we need to include all of them. Again, agreeing with Evelyn that, we need a more inclusive tent, not a more exclusive tent. So in that sense, we should definitively think about how we are engaging with Global South governments, with Global South movements, with Global South civil society. I do think that there is a question of capacity there, as we think about bringing more and more Global South voices into the conversation. There is both the question of the demand and the supply. It's not a lot of demand because some people want to keep their conversation among themselves. But even when you try to push for more voices, there is not a lot of global thinking in the Global South, right? So we do need to create that stronger global capacity in the Global South if we are going to be able to engage in these conversations in a more substantive manner. Because what I see is like, yes, there is some progress being made, and there are certain things that are slightly different. But even when you look at interesting initiatives like JETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership, that South Africa started, Indonesia is now part, right? An interest, definitely a step in the right direction. But when you talk to people in South Africa and in Indonesia, what they are going to tell you is like, we don't see this as a main difference to the way we used to receive money, and how, it's the same money now labeled in a slightly different way with the sector. But what is interesting is that the fact that both South Africa and Indonesia are raising all these concerns is a clear indication that these countries are willing to be more vocal about some of the challenges of the current system. So I still think that JETP, for example, is an interesting exercise that we need to pay more attention. That being, but beyond things like JETP, again, agreeing with Evelyn, I think that there are a bunch of new options out there that we need to pay more attention. Many of those options and many of those new tools are actually coming from Asia. And I do think that we need to pay more attention to some of those tools, both in terms of the private sector, private philanthropy in those countries, and also in terms of governments in the Global South and other stakeholders in those countries. For example, we have been doing some very interesting work around capitals market, and it's super interesting to see how we can use capital market in a way that is much more meaningful for the work that we do at the social justice level. So I do think that when we are thinking about different instruments, there is much more to pay attention, and that most of these interests, but most of these new tools are actually including a much more diverse set of players. Their stakeholders are much more varied, and that will definitely allow us to move in the right direction. So yes, I agree with Evelyn about unlikely allies, and I hope that sooner rather than later we can stop talking about unlikely allies and just talk about what are the new set of stakeholders that we are going to be involving moving forward in any of these initiatives. So let me stop here.
Thank you so much, Martin, for all of these ideas. We will get back to some of those in a minute. I would also like for the three speakers to think if you have any questions or comments to pose to each other. And I would also like to invite for those who are connected to the Zoom to post any questions you might have on the chat, or for those who are on YouTube to post it also in the chat over there. So moving towards roles in the second round of questions, looking forward, how do you think we could re-anchor solidarity in practice from the Global South?
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me come back again, and thinking about how we can grow the development finance by re-anchoring the solidarity for the Global South. And one of the things that I have noticed, for example, is that in various continents, like in Africa, we have initiatives that African leaders are trying to put together. For example, in addressing the debt issues, bringing in financial sustainability mechanism, trying to think about an alternative credit rating mechanism, which is aimed at reducing probably the premium that keeps the debt very high. Support for such initiatives for me is very important in making, say, for example, Africa feel that they are still part and parcel of the multilateral initiatives or multilateral discussions at different levels. And I think I want to look at one of the statements that is there in the Seville compressor, which says that we cannot afford a retreat from the multilateral cooperation, and that we want to commit that to reform even the international financial architecture. So for me, when we think about reforms and when we have made these such commitments, I think we need to put them into action rather than just remaining as just a piece of information. The second thing that I have seen is an element, again, coming from Seville, is that, yes, we have agreed that, say, for example, the common framework for debt restructuring has issues. And a key element that was coming from there is agreeing that we can have what we call the club of borrowers. And in my assumption is that when we have such kind of a club, it may help actually to bring in to the table the voices not just of the of the creditors, but also the voices of the borrowers. And probably it will be easier now to discuss matters to do with the debt management. The third thing is that, since 2014, I think we have seen development banks coming in at regional level. We have the BRICS, I think, new development bank. We also have the Bank of the South and etc. These are very, very good initiatives. And all that we need is actually to support them, provide them with an environment for them to grow, because they bring in a different perspective. Like the BRICS Bank is trying to show us that you can model a multilateral institution away from a situation where membership does not have the same vote. So I think that it's an area that we need to watch as far as the BRICS and New Development Bank is concerned, because it's giving us a different perspective on how we can still mobilize development finance. And then lastly, is the emphasis on domestic resource mobilization. It's one of the things that one would say is not like a last resort, but it should be the very first element to think about in addressing a development finance. But geopolitical issues have played a key role in destabilizing the growth trajectories for even countries in the global south. And this in itself tend to destabilize or to disrupt domestic resource mobilization. But at the same time, matters to do with how we manage our domestic resources becomes very, very crucial, so that as the global south, we can also demonstrate that we have efficiency even with the amounts that we are borrowing from outside. And then finally is the new tools that we can experiment with, including not necessarily having bonds that are in the hard currency of US dollar and the like. And we have seen the panda bonds coming in, and I've seen that Egypt has actually taken up with the support from various MDBs. And this could be the way forward in terms of thinking about domestic currency kind of bonds going forward as alternatives in financing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rose, and especially for sharing these types of innovations that I think that are very, very in the lines that we should be thinking about. So we have a couple of questions from some of the participants at the Zoom. I would like first to give the floor to Mark Florbet. Mark, would you like to pose the questions you had? I would suggest for you to pose the 3 questions, and then we can give the floor to the speakers to pick which one they want to answer.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the panelists. This is very interesting and and very inspiring as well. I would like to take inspiration from the title of this session, which was about reweaving the social fabric and going away from disaffiliation, which is indeed a sort of big issue nowadays, both at the national and the international level, almost everywhere. And this motivates the 3 questions I wanted to ask. First is, since you all have great experience in the history of development, how do you see the relation and the relative priority of poverty eradication and development, right? One could argue that each of them should come first. So poverty eradication could be a consequence of development, as maybe we have seen in China. And conversely, maybe poverty eradication is the best way to empower people so that they can really start also being part of the economy and therefore develop the whole economy. The second question is, you all probably have heard about this Global Alliance Beyond GDP that has been launched in Sevilla, if I'm not mistaken. And I wanted to ask if you have views about what this may induce in terms of the direction of finance and the way in which countries may react to indicators being a bit broader? Would that incentivize the countries to pay more attention to these other things, or on the contrary, to try to stay below some thresholds and potentially having some counterintuitive and undesirable effects on non-market policies or social policies? And the third question is, there is a debate at the level of social policy for within nations about targeting versus universal systems. And in the International Panel on Social Progress, we had very fierce advocates for universal systems. So that was quite interesting debate internally. What about the global situation? So we could imagine having global formulas, like, for instance, we have advocates in our group for a global universal basic income. And the idea would be, coming back to this story about desafiliation, giving everyone in the world a sense of global citizenship through mechanisms of solidarity which have this universal and really global feature. So yeah, sorry, this was long, but these are just my 3 questions.
Thank you so much. So I would suggest just to go in the same order that we have been going. So Evelyn, would you like to address any of these questions?
Yeah, maybe I can start. This would be speaking maybe a bit more from my personal view rather than from my organizational standpoint, given this is not necessarily the kind of level, the questions that we are working on. I think in terms of poverty eradication and development in Asia, a lot of times they have been very closely related, that a lot of countries have also developed, have also eradicated poverty, as I think Martin has said very clearly, like for China, through development and through economic development. And that is a way that a lot of countries still want to develop, right? To actually empower citizens. I mean, there's always a case of still providing basics to everyone, that there needs to be a minimum floor on education, on health, on equality, on rights, etc. And I think even more so now that climate crisis is also affecting the most poor and the most vulnerable in every context. So we cannot neglect poverty eradication and only focus on development. But I do think every country still has to focus on both of these. And in terms of not sure which necessarily comes first, I think one very pressing question now is, how do you also ensure people are productive? Once you manage the basic needs, people also still need to get incomes in order to then upgrade their lives, and moving from that under $2 mark of poverty to slightly higher. We've really, I think, helped to reduce hardcore poverty, but then there's still so many people below what would say is still in that poverty level. So I don't think that just aid will be able to upgrade everyone to the life that we think that every person should have, that they would also still need to be, employment opportunities, other ways to make a living. And that's, I think, where development also comes in. So that's my long-winded way of answering number one, and maybe I'll just pause there for views from Rose and Martin as well.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. So moving on to Martin. Martin, would you like to answer on any of Mark's questions?
Okay, so let me try. But Mark, I will go back to the framing of your question about the title of this event, about reweaving social fabric. And I actually agree that this is the main task that we have to face. And honestly, I think that one big challenge that we need to think together about what we're doing is like this idea of we are all in this together, right? Like today, both at the global level and at the domestic level in most countries around the world, people are much more comfortable, taking adversarial positions than bringing people together, right? And this to me is a key challenge that we have. And if we are going to reweave social fabric, we all need to commit to figure out what do we need to do differently if we are really going to start rebuilding the social fabric in a way that actually brings people together rather than set them apart, because this is what we are seeing today. And when trying to answer your questions, all of these questions can be answered very differently if we think that this is a fight that we need to win, or if this is something that we need to persuade our fellows in the community about how are we embracing these challenges together, right? Again, poverty alleviation, what comes first, etc. I would take whatever I can these days. Like, if a country is, fiercely eradicating poverty, I'm not going to say that there is a problem with that. Of course, I'd rather have systems that are about empowering citizens and, empowering people in order for them to be part of the economy. And I will also take that. But I actually think that the key challenge that we have is like, how are we bringing these visions together rather than pose them as, ones against each other? I fully agree with you that that is very much related to the indicators that we use. And I think that at this point, there is vast literature that the indicators that we are normally using are not working and that we need better indicators. My sense is that the movement toward those new indicators, it's moving forward. So I'm kind of optimistic about that. And in that sense, I really hope that we are going to be looking at, what progress look like from a very different angle. Your question about targeting versus universal at the global level, I think it's a super interesting one. And I haven't thought enough about this, so I wouldn't dare to answer your question. What I would say, though, is, one of the challenges that we face when thinking about development financing right now is a strong opposition from lots of people in the global north. Okay, so a lot of things that we think are the right things to be done, people in the global north are not supporting them. And when I say people, I'm not saying only governments, I actually saying people. Like when you look at, trends of people supporting for development financing in global north countries is going down, right? So a part of a big challenge that we face is how do we ensure that we get stronger support in those countries? Because if we are going to build something really meaningful, we do need global north partners. I don't think we only need them, and I don't think it's enough with them. And I think that global south countries can take the lead on many of these issues. But eventually, we do need global north support. And if we are going to do that, we definitely need more support for people in those countries, not only governments in those countries. So that's not really an answer to your targeting very universal, but as much as I will agree with you with universal, I can't imagine bringing this conversation today to many countries in the global north and having a successful engagement from Congress and parliaments in those countries.
Thank you so much, Martin. The audience as well.
Can I come in?
Please.
Yeah. I lost you for a minute. Yeah. Okay. I didn't hear what you said. Yeah. So thanks very much. I think I want to agree with Evelyn and Martin with what they have said, and just remind us ourselves when the Millennium Development Goals were being set. That is in early 2000s. One of the expectation for poverty reduction was that economies should grow by more than 7%. That if you grow by more than 7%, then the probabilities of bringing down poverty would be there. But of course, as we look at what's going on as far as growth is concerned, we realize that even for Global South, getting to 7% is seemingly a tall order. I think China tried and it was able to do it through its investment program. But again, it is not necessarily sustaining the same. But I also want to say that in the Sevilla's compressor, one of the commitments again that was put is leaders agreeing that they would recommit to end poverty and hunger everywhere, leaving no one behind. But the question that was not necessarily very clear is the strategies that one would actually utilize to end poverty and hunger everywhere. And I think that still remains the key issue that we need to keep addressing. And probably if we had good support even for the Global South, the think tanks, these are the areas that we would want them to actually bring out more evidence so that we can see the pathway that we can follow for ending poverty and hunger. And secondly, I also want to say that when it comes to this global alliance beyond the GDP, I think it's a good idea just from the face of it. I remember that when one is talking about the IMF quotas and the like and the formula, a key element that always comes out is how can you reform that formula so that when you are thinking about even distribution of SDRs, they go to where actually the needs are. And if that is what would actually see as seeing the distribution of SDRs when they are done, coming to where it is needed, then I would go for it. But at the moment, it's still a debate on how to reform the quota formula for IMF.
Thank you so much, Rose. So we have another question from Olivier Buan from IBSP. We have a couple of minutes left. So Olivier, if you could pose a question really quick and we'll see who wants to address it.
Thanks, Gala. I'll be very quick. And thank you very much for the panel. Very interesting, insights coming from like three different regions and different types of stakeholders. My question, I hear you, Martin, in saying that there's this sense of urgency and that we need to move better and faster, in a sense. My question will be, what is the best process, in a sense, to move forward, especially in the current lack of, I would say, global governance mechanisms that are fully functioning? So is that kind of interregional collaboration that would not be only South-South collaboration, but as you rightly said, Martin, some kind of South-North, if you permit me, not North-South, but South-North collaborations, maybe with some like leaders coming from middle-sized countries that would, in a sense, try to organize some kind of conversation, addressing possibly with a pragmatic approach some themes, as Evelyn said, or also Rose, addressing maybe not only poverty alleviation, but maybe other topics, having a pragmatic approach, but at the same time, trying to bring a kind of a post-ADG, SDG agenda. Because if we want to, we're all in the same boat, in a sense, or on the same planet. And if we want to move forward, I think we need to combine a kind of pragmatic approach on the one hand, and a kind of a global narrative on the other. And, it's not a tension, it's more about an articulation. So how you would it's kind of a, a trillion-dollar question, if I may say, but how can we kind of best move the process forward in order to address this urgency? And I think that it will be kind of a combination of all these channels. Yeah. Also, this kind of multi-stakeholder approach where you have like foundations, international organizations, national governments playing together, and NGOs as well, obviously. So how do you, maybe as a kind of a closing statements by all of you, how do you see the move towards this kind of combination of different channels and approach between something that would be pragmatic, but also something that would bring some kind of a momentum behind a global narrative? Thank you.
Martin, do you want to start?
Sure. And Oliver, I think it's a great question. And a quick answer will be, I don't think we have the luxury to choose these days. We need to try everything, right? Like we need solutions and we need them fast. So I actually think we need to be working at all those levels that you are suggesting. I think if there is an opportunity to engage at the multilateral level like Seville, we need to try it. If there is a possibility to build something around a community of the willings, with a different kind of development financing, like global public investment or something like that, we should definitely try it. Interregional, of course, we need to be thinking about within region and interregional, north-south, absolutely in a specific case. And we need to think about some of the innovations that Evelyn was posing. All of these things are things that we need to do at the same time, and we need to do them now. Of course, we need to coordinate within each of those efforts. Okay, so I don't think we need to be very careful. We shouldn't have 10 initiatives related to multilateralism, right? Let's have one, etc. But the coordination should be within those levels, not among all of them. Each of them we should try different things. And of course, understanding that not all of us are going to be involved in all of that. So Evelyn may probably be on the innovation side, and you may be in the interregional thing, and some of us will be. So it's totally fine that we divide our roles in this context, but honestly, we don't have the luxury to choose these days.
Thank you, Martin. Evelyn, do you want to come at it?
Yeah, and I think I will echo what Martin said. There's so much already going on, and it's also a constant struggle as a network to figure out, how do you actually get people not to duplicate things? And sometimes you're saying the same thing, you're just using different language, and you actually want to come together and do so. So I would say before starting anything new, try to join, bring time, bring money, bring resources. I think one thing we've learned is that people listen to money. Unfortunately, it's when you actually show you have the resource to back it up. And also, some things might just be old and unpopular, but they're actually the ones who have been there the whole time. So I will also say sometimes we're always biased towards the new, but we can go back to the old and who's already been working deeply with the communities.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Rose, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, it's just to say that emphasizing on South-South cooperation does not necessarily imply that you are substituting the North-South cooperation. I think what we are talking about is complementing each other. And I think efforts that include, for example, the permanent membership that AU was given to by the G20 is a clear indication that we still want to work North-South together, but what we are looking for is being on the table and, the representation being more comprehensive for all of us to be able to exchange. So I think I agree with Evelyn, I agree with Olivia, I agree with Martin, that there are various dimensions and there is no one that fits all in addressing the issues that we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose. So this has been a very fruitful discussion. We have started saying that the system is not working. It's not working, at least in the way we want it to work, and that we are also going through a really relevant change in the global order, where we need to adjust to the new scenario and try to put this objective of fostering development and closing the gaps in terms of development that we have from the different regions in the world. We are used to the global north financing the global south, and that is probably not longer the case. The incentives to cooperate in this change of order are being questioned. And we also need to acknowledge this huge diversity in the different geographies that we have. So I really liked Martin's categorization with ideas, champions, and institutionality. And I think that throughout the webinar, we have been going in depth into this three aspects of it. So we have discussed several innovations that can be brought to the table and that can provide a greater impact also in terms of what we are looking towards. But we certainly need to build that allies, those coalitions of champions to push this change forward. And we need to bring to the table, I really liked Evelyn's unlikely allies from different sectors and building those ecosystem with different players. As Rose mentioned, in this coalition building, we need to strengthen the voice of the Global South and also the capacities in terms of who can act as champions. In terms of the institutionalization of this way forward, I think that is where we have less trajectory, but we have discussed some values. For instance, having more voices heard, having the voices of the borrowers, as Rose mentioned, for instance, in debt discussions, much more visible and have a greater plurality also of voices in those discussions. We are at a crossroads globally where it is evident that we are not able to solve our problems individually. We need to act together, and there we have a huge problem because our trust is broken, the social tissue is degrading, and we need to put a focus there. There are experiences that are very fruitful, especially in a hostile context, going through crisis from the Global South on how to reweave the social fabric. And I would like to put a focus there because I think we need to learn much more from those experiences. But I would like to end with what Rose mentioned, that we need to move from commitments to actions. And we need to put these new ideas, these innovations to work. And as Martin mentioned, do it in a way that is both better and faster. So thank you so much for your extremely interesting insights, Evelyn, Martin, and Rose. And thank you so much, all of you who have joined this webinar, both now and who will watch it later. See you next time in the next series of the New Horizons, Nuevos Horizontes webinar.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.